The morning the HOA chain shut my farm road, I knew someone had finally pushed things too far. That gravel road had been part of my life for nearly 20 years. It ran straight through my pasture, curving past the old oak trees before connecting my farmhouse to the county highway. Every feed delivery, every tractor trip into town, every emergency vehicle that had ever needed to reach this valley used that road. Without it, I would have to drive almost 40 minutes around the hills just to reach the nearest store. But when I stepped outside that morning, coffee still warm in my hand, something stopped me in my tracks. Right there across the entrance stood a bright yellow steel gate, a thick chain wrapped around it, a brand new padlock glinting in the morning sun. And hanging in the center was a huge laminated sign that read, ROAD, closed for community. Safety. For a moment I honestly thought it had to be some kind of mistake. Then I noticed the woman standing beside the gate holding a clipboard. Lydia Caldwell, president of the Silver Creek Estates HOA. She watched me walk up the driveway with a calm little smile, like she'd just won a war. "You can't use this road anymore," she said. "The board voted last night." I looked at the gate, then back at her. Because there was one very important thing Lydia didn't understand about that road. It wasn't HOA property. And in about 10 minutes, the county sheriff was going to remind her. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to Fenceline Files. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? My name is Daniel Harper. I'm 52 years old, and I've spent most of my life working the same land my father and grandfather did before me. Harper Ridge Farm sits just outside a quiet stretch of countryside in Redstone Valley, Wyoming. It's not a fancy place. Just rolling pasture, a red barn that's been patched more times than I can count, and a gravel road that cuts through the property toward the county highway. That road is important, more important than most people realize. It runs straight through the lower edge of my land and connects the farm to the outside world. Every feed delivery truck, every cattle trailer, every vet visit, every tractor heading into town uses that road. Without it, getting in or out of the valley becomes a long and frustrating trip around the hills. For decades, it had never been a problem. Then Silver Creek Estates showed up. About 10 years earlier, a group of developers bought land along the ridge above my farm. They wanted to build a high-end subdivision with big houses, clean sidewalks, and manicured lawns that looked like something out of a magazine. Before construction started, they came down to my farm to talk. I remember the meeting clearly. They were polite enough, shaking hands and promising that the neighborhood would be quiet and respectful of the surrounding land. The only thing they asked about was the gravel road that crossed the corner of my property. I told them exactly what it was. That road wasn't just a driveway. It was a registered agricultural access route listed with the county. That meant it had to stay open for farm equipment, delivery trucks, and emergency vehicles. Fire departments used routes like that to reach remote areas during wildfires. Ambulances sometimes relied on them when storms washed out other roads. The developers said they understood. They promised the neighborhood would respect the easement. For the first year or two, everything stayed peaceful. Then people started moving into Silver Creek Estates. Most of the homes belonged to wealthy folks who had come from bigger cities. They wanted quiet country views, clean walking trails, and the kind of peaceful lifestyle you see in real estate brochures. What they didn't expect was an actual working farm sitting right below their neighborhood. At first, the complaints were small. Someone didn't like the dust that rose behind feed trucks driving down the gravel road. Another neighbor complained that tractors moved too slowly when they crossed the intersection near the subdivision entrance. A few residents said cattle sometimes wandered too close to the fence line when they were out jogging in the mornings. None of it seemed serious at the time. Living near farmland comes with a few inconveniences, and I figured most people would eventually get used to it. But then Lydia Caldwell became president of the HOA. Lydia had moved into the neighborhood about 2 years earlier. Before that, she had worked as a real estate broker somewhere down in Arizona. She carried herself like someone who believed everything had a price tag attached to it, including the landscape. Her biggest concern seemed to be something she called protecting property value appearance. The first letter from the HOA arrived not long after she took over. It was polite enough on the surface, asking if I could reduce heavy vehicle traffic along the road during certain hours so residents could enjoy quieter mornings. I wrote back explaining that farm deliveries don't exactly follow office schedules. A few weeks later, another letter showed up suggesting I consider paving the gravel road to reduce dust. Paving a farm road that tractors drive across every day would have cost more money than the entire road was worth. Then came the complaints about tractor noise. According to Lydia, several homeowners had expressed concern that early morning farm equipment disturbed people who like to jog or walk their dogs through the neighborhood. I tried to stay cooperative. I slowed truck deliveries when I could and reminded drivers to keep speeds down near the houses. But every compromise seemed to invite a new complaint. Eventually, Lydia started repeating the same phrase every time we spoke. Safety hazard. According to her, the farm road was dangerous for children riding bikes and for residents jogging along the subdivision entrance path. She argued that closing the road would protect the community. I told her the same thing every time. That road had existed long before the subdivision was even an idea. It was registered with the county, and it wasn't going anywhere. For months, the tension simmered between my farm and the HOA leadership. I figured it was just another example of neighborhood politics, the kind that eventually burns itself out once people get tired of arguing. I never imagined they would take it further, until the morning I walked outside and found a steel gate chained across my road. I walked the rest of the way down the driveway slowly, trying to keep my temper under control. Early morning sunlight stretched across the pasture behind me, and the valley was quiet except for the distant sound of cattle shifting in the fields. Normally, it was the kind of peaceful start to the day that reminded me why I had stayed on this land my entire life. But that yellow gate sitting across my road ruined the whole picture. Lydia Caldwell stood beside it with a clipboard tucked under her arm, looking perfectly satisfied with herself. A couple of workers I hadn't noticed at first were already packing tools back into the bed of a pickup truck, which told me the gate hadn't been there long. "You're serious about this?" I asked when I reached the entrance. She gave a small shrug like the matter had already been decided. "The board voted last night," she said. "This road is closed for community safety." I looked at the heavy chain wrapped around the gate and the brand new padlock hanging from it. The steel posts holding the gate were sunk deep into the ground with fresh concrete still drying around the base. "You blocked a farm access road overnight," I said. "It's not a farm road anymore," Lydia replied calmly. "It's within Silver Creek Estate's boundaries. Farm traffic creates unnecessary danger for residents." That statement alone told me she either didn't understand the situation or didn't care to. "Did you check the county records before doing this?" I asked. Lydia lifted her chin slightly. "We consulted our legal committee. That sounded impressive on paper, but it didn't mean much in practice. Most HOAs called a couple of volunteers with law degrees their legal committee. It didn't make them experts in county easement law." As I stepped closer to the gate, something else caught my eye. The steel posts holding it in place had been cemented into the ground about 6 feet inside my fence line, not the HOA side of the boundary. Mine. I crouched down for a moment and brushed some loose dirt away from the base of the post. The concrete was still damp enough that my boot left a faint impression near the edge. They hadn't just closed the road. They had drilled posts straight into my property. By that point, a few people from the neighborhood had wandered down to see what was happening. A couple stood near the corner sidewalk with coffee cups in their hands. Others leaned against parked cars. Some of them looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight as they watched. Others nodded approvingly toward Lydia, clearly believing she had done something heroic for the community. I stood up again and looked at her. "You realize that road is protected under county easement law?" I said. Her expression barely changed. "Oh, please," she replied. "You farmers always think you own everything." The way she said it carried that quiet confidence people get when they believe authority is on their side. I could feel the eyes of the neighbors on both of us as the moment stretched. "You're blocking an agricultural access route," I said evenly. "You can't legally close it. We just did." She tapped the clipboard lightly with her pen, as if the paperwork inside it made the whole situation official. "The board voted unanimously," she continued. "Farm equipment moving through a residential community is a safety hazard. Joggers use this entrance every morning. Children ride bikes here." "And the county?" I asked. The HOA has jurisdiction inside the neighborhood. That statement was wrong in more ways than I could count, but arguing with Lydia Caldwell was like arguing with a brick wall that believed it had a law degree. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. A breeze pushed across the valley, rattling the laminated sign hanging from the chain. HOA closed for community. Safe, Eddie. Finally, I nodded once. All right, I said. Lydia blinked slightly, clearly expecting a bigger argument. That's it? She asked. That's it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Her eyebrows lifted as she watched me scroll through my contacts. What are you doing? She asked. Calling someone who actually handles county roads. I pressed the call button and lifted the phone to my ear. Behind Lydia, a few of the watching neighbors leaned closer, curious about what would happen next. She folded her arms and let out a short laugh. You can call whoever you want, she said. The confidence in her voice made it clear she believed the HOA had complete authority over the situation. But what Lydia didn't realize was that the gravel road she had just blocked wasn't just a driveway running through my land. It was registered in the county agricultural access system, and in this county, blocking one of those roads wasn't just a bad idea. It was illegal. About 15 minutes after I made the call, the quiet of the valley was broken by the distant rumble of an engine climbing down the ridge road. A white patrol SUV came around the bend and rolled slowly toward the gate. The blue county emblem on the door flashed in the morning sunlight as the vehicle pulled up beside the fence line. The engine shut off and the driver stepped out, Deputy Mark Rivera. Mark had been working the Redstone Valley area for years. Out here, law enforcement wasn't some distant presence. Deputies knew the farmers, the ranchers, and most of the families who had lived in the county long enough to remember when the land was still mostly open fields. He spotted me almost immediately. Morning, Daniel, he said as he walked over. Morning, Mark. The calm familiarity between us seemed to irritate Lydia right away. She stepped forward quickly, clipboard already raised like she was preparing to deliver an official statement. Deputy, she said, forcing a polite smile. I'm Lydia Caldwell, president of the Silver Creek Estates Homeowners Association. Rivera nodded once. And this road, she continued confidently, gesturing toward the gate, has been closed by HOA authority for community safety reasons. She said the words slowly, like they carried legal weight. Farm vehicles have been creating dangerous conditions for residents. Joggers, children, bicyclists. It's simply not safe anymore. Rivera listened without interrupting. His expression remained neutral as he looked past her toward the steel gate blocking the road. Then he walked over to it. The chain rattled slightly as he tested the tension with one hand. He examined the fresh concrete around the posts and the laminated sign hanging from the center. HOA closed for community safety. Behind us, more neighbors had begun gathering along the sidewalk and the edge of the subdivision entrance. Word travels quickly in quiet neighborhoods, and nothing attracts attention like a police vehicle parked in front of an HOA dispute. Rivera crouched down near the base of the gatepost for a moment, studying the ground. Then he stood again and slowly scanned the fence line. That was when he noticed it. About 10 feet away from the gate stood a small metal marker post, half buried in the grass beside my fence. It was weathered from years of exposure, but still clearly visible if you knew what to look for. The county easement marker. Rivera walked over to it and brushed some dirt away with the toe of his boot. His expression changed almost immediately, not dramatic. Just the kind of quiet shift in posture you see when someone suddenly realizes the situation in front of them isn't what they were first told. He turned back toward Lydia. Ma'am, he said calmly, did the HOA get county approval before installing this gate? For the first time since the morning started, Lydia hesitated. It wasn't a long pause. Just a second or two, but it was enough. Well, she said carefully, the board reviewed the matter internally. Rivera kept his voice even. That wasn't my question. A few people standing behind us exchanged quick glances. Lydia adjusted her grip on the clipboard. Our legal committee determined that the road fell within HOA boundaries. Rivera nodded once, though there was a faint seriousness in his expression now. I see. He stepped back toward his patrol vehicle and reached inside the open door for the radio microphone. This is Unit 12, he said into it. Requesting confirmation on a road classification in Redstone Valley, agricultural access route near Harper Ridge Farm. Static crackled softly through the speaker as the county dispatcher acknowledged the request. While we waited for the response, Lydia crossed her arms. The HOA has jurisdiction inside the neighborhood, she insisted. We have every right to regulate unsafe road conditions. Rivera didn't argue with her. He simply leaned against the patrol vehicle, listening to the radio. I stayed quiet. There wasn't any reason to push the conversation further. The facts would speak for themselves soon enough. Behind us, the small group of homeowners had grown larger. People whispered to each other in low voices, watching the scene unfold with growing curiosity. Some of them had probably assumed the gate installation was completely legal. After all, HOA boards usually acted with the confidence of authority, but the longer the deputy stood there studying that easement marker and waiting for confirmation from the county office, the more the mood around the crowd began to shift. Because something about Rivera's reaction made it clear this wasn't going the way Lydia expected. The radio on his shoulder crackled again. He lifted the microphone slowly, and when the dispatcher's voice came through with the road classification, the look on Rivera's face told me everything I needed to know. Lydia Caldwell had made a very serious mistake. The radio on Deputy Rivera's shoulder crackled again, breaking the quiet tension that had settled over the road. Everyone standing nearby seemed to lean in just a little closer, waiting to hear what the county office would say. Rivera lifted the microphone. Unit 12 here. The dispatcher's voice came through clearly enough for those of us closest to hear pieces of the response. Rivera listened without speaking for a few seconds. Then he nodded slowly. "Copy that," he said. He clipped the microphone back onto his shoulder and turned toward us again. His eyes moved first to me, then to Lydia, and finally to the bright yellow gate blocking the road. "This road is classified as an agricultural emergency access route," he said calmly. A murmur passed through the small crowd of homeowners. Rivera continued, speaking the way someone does when explaining something that really shouldn't need explaining. "That means it's registered with the county for agricultural, fire, and medical access. Routes like this are required to remain open at all times." Lydia's confident expression tightened slightly. Rivera gestured toward the chain wrapped around the gate. "You can't close this road." For a moment, Lydia just stared at him, as if the words didn't quite make sense. Then she shook her head. "That's not correct," she said quickly. "The neighborhood voted on this. The HOA board has authority to regulate roads inside the subdivision." Rivera didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry either. If anything, he seemed almost patient. "Ma'am," he said, "OA votes don't override county easement law." That statement carried more weight than Lydia seemed prepared for. A few people standing along the sidewalk exchanged uneasy glances. Rivera pointed toward the steel posts holding the gate in place. "And there's another problem," he added. He walked over and tapped one of the fresh concrete bases lightly with his boot. "Installing permanent structures inside a registered agricultural easement is considered obstruction of the county access route." The words hung in the air. Obstruction. That wasn't just a technical violation. It was something the county took seriously. A man standing near the curb muttered quietly to his wife. Another neighbor folded his arms and looked down at the ground like he was suddenly reconsidering the whole situation. It didn't take long for the mood around the gathering to start shifting. When the gate had first gone up that morning, a lot of the residents had probably assumed Lydia knew what she was doing. HOA boards usually spoke with a kind of confident authority that made people assume the rules were on their side. But now the deputy was standing in front of them explaining that the road couldn't legally be closed at all. I stayed where I was beside the fence, keeping my voice calm. "I told the HOA about the easement months ago," I said. Lydia turned toward me immediately. "You never provided documentation," she snapped. I shrugged slightly. "The county records are public." Rivera stepped back toward the patrol vehicle, clearly trying to keep the conversation from turning into an argument. "Regardless of what discussions happened before," he said, "the road needs to be reopened." He looked directly at Lydia. "That gate has to come down." Her grip tightened around the clipboard. "We spent HOA funds installing it," she said sharply. "You can't just order us to remove community property." Rivera remained completely composed. It's not community property if it's blocking a county easement. That seemed to land harder than anything else he had said so far. A few of the homeowners began whispering again, their voices carrying just enough for pieces of conversation to drift across the road. Did the board actually check this? I thought they had county approval, that's what Lydia said. The quiet support she had earlier in the morning was beginning to crumble, but Lydia wasn't backing down. The board voted unanimously, she insisted. Residents deserve safe streets. Rivera exhaled slowly. Safety routes are exactly why agricultural access roads exist, he replied. Emergency vehicles rely on them. He glanced toward the chain one more time. So I'm going to ask again. Unlock the gate. The moment stretched out. Everyone watched Lydia. If she had simply walked forward and opened a padlock, the situation might have ended right there. But pride can make people double down on bad decisions. She folded her arms. No. Rivera studied her for a second. Then he nodded once, like someone who had just reached the end of a very patient conversation. All right, he said quietly. He reached for the radio on his shoulder again. That was when I realized the situation had just moved into a different stage entirely. Because if Lydia wasn't going to unlock the gate herself, the deputy was about to bring someone who could make that decision for her. Deputy Rivera lifted the radio again and stepped a few feet away from the crowd before speaking into it. His voice stayed calm and professional, but the tone had shifted. This wasn't a simple neighborhood disagreement anymore. Dispatch. I'm going to need Sheriff Blake out here, he said. We've got an obstruction on an agricultural emergency access route. That phrase carried weight. You could see it ripple through the small crowd of homeowners gathered along the edge of the road. Some of them shifted uncomfortably. Others glanced at Lydia as if trying to figure out whether things had gone farther than anyone expected. Lydia stood firm beside the gate, arms crossed, her clipboard tucked tightly against her side. She looked annoyed more than worried. I leaned against my fence and waited. About 20 minutes later, the low rumble of another engine echoed down from the ridge. A second patrol vehicle appeared around the curve of the road, moving slowly through the entrance of Silver Creek Estates. This one didn't stop halfway. It pulled right up beside Rivera's SUV. The door opened, and Sheriff Thomas Blake stepped out. Blake had been sheriff of Redstone County for a long time. Long enough that most folks in the valley knew him by name. He was in his early 60s now, tall, broad-shouldered, with a kind of steady presence that came from decades of dealing with problems exactly like this one. He took a quick look around the scene before walking over. "Morning, Mark," he said to Rivera. "Morning, Sheriff." Blake's eyes shifted toward me next. "Well, I'll be," he said with a faint smile. "Daniel Harper." "Morning, Sheriff." We shook hands briefly. Blake nodded toward the gate blocking the road. What seems to be the issue here? Before Rivera could answer, Lydia stepped forward again. "I'm Lydia Caldwell, president of the Silver Creek Estates Homeowners Association," she announced. Her voice had returned to that confident tone she used earlier, like she believed the presence of the sheriff would reinforce her authority. "This road has been closed by the HOA due to safety concerns," she explained. "Heavy farm vehicles have been creating dangerous conditions for residents." Blake listened without interrupting. Rivera quietly filled in the missing details. "County confirmed the road classification," he said. "Agricultural emergency access route." Blake's eyes moved slowly from the gate to the easement marker beside the fence, then back to the fresh concrete around the posts. For a moment he didn't say anything, but the expression on his face changed slightly. Recognition. "I know this road," Blake said. He turned toward me again. "This is the one we used during the Redstone wildfire a few summers back, isn't it?" "That's the one," I said. "During wildfire season, the valley sometimes relied on farm access roads to move emergency vehicles quickly through rough terrain. That gravel road had helped fire crews reach the ridge during one particularly bad summer." Blake stepped closer to the gate and ran his hand along the heavy chain. Then he looked directly at Lydia. "Who installed this?" "The HOA board approved it," she said quickly. "Residents voted last night." Blake nodded slowly, like he was absorbing the information. Then he pointed to the easement marker standing beside the fence. "You're aware that this is a registered agricultural emergency route?" Lydia hesitated for just a moment. Our legal committee determined the road fell within HOA jurisdiction. Blake looked back at the gate again. Then he spoke a single sentence. Remove it. The simplicity of the command caught everyone off guard. No long explanation. No debate. Just 2 words. Lydia straightened immediately. We spent HOA funds installing that gate, she protested. You can't just order us to take down community property. Blake's voice remained calm. Then you shouldn't have installed it on a county easement. The crowd along the sidewalk had gone completely quiet now. People were watching the exchange carefully, some of them clearly realizing that the situation had turned far more serious than they expected. But Lydia wasn't finished arguing. The HOA has authority over neighborhood safety, she insisted. Residents voted for this. Blake folded his arms slightly. County law doesn't change because of an HOA vote. The words were firm but controlled. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Finally, Blake stepped back and glanced at the chain again. Then he looked directly at Lydia. I'm going to give you the opportunity to unlock this gate, he said. Her jaw tightened. No. Blake nodded once. If the HOA doesn't unlock it, he said evenly, we will cut it. He paused just long enough for the weight of the statement to settle over the crowd. And the HOA will receive a citation for obstructing an agricultural emergency access route. A quiet ripple of whispers moved through the neighbors standing nearby. Because at that moment, everyone realized something important. The situation had just crossed from a neighborhood disagreement into a legal problem. For a few seconds after Sheriff Blake finished speaking, the road went completely quiet. The kind of quiet where everyone is waiting to see who will move first. Lydia stood beside the gate with her arms folded tight across her chest, jaw set like she was daring someone to challenge her. The clipboard she had been carrying earlier was now pressed against her side, but the confidence she had shown that morning was starting to look more like stubbornness than authority. Sheriff Blake looked at her for a moment longer. I'm giving you the chance to unlock it, he said calmly. She didn't move. This is private property, Lydia replied sharply. The HOA has authority over this road. The sheriff didn't raise his voice. He simply turned his head and pointed toward the metal post standing beside my fence. The county easement marker, weathered, half buried in grass, but still official. No, he said evenly. It isn't. Then he glanced toward Deputy Rivera. Rivera didn't need another explanation. He walked back to the patrol truck, opened the rear compartment, and reached inside. When he stepped back out, he was holding a pair of heavy bolt cutters. The steel jaws caught the sunlight as he carried them toward the gate. A murmur spread through the neighbors gathered along the sidewalk and driveway edges. Some people leaned forward to watch. Others folded their arms, suddenly realizing they were about to see the HOA's authority challenged in a very public way. Rivera stopped beside the chain. Lydia stepped forward quickly. You can't cut that, she said. Rivera looked at the sheriff. Blake nodded once. Go ahead. Rivera positioned the jaws of the bolt cutters around the thick steel chain wrapped through the gate. For a moment, the entire crowd went silent again. You could hear the faint clink of metal against metal as he adjusted the cutters. Lydia tried one last protest. This is private property, she said loudly. The sheriff didn't even look at her this time. He simply pointed again toward the easement marker beside the fence. No, he said. It isn't. Rivera squeezed the handles. The cutters bit down. And with one loud metallic snap, the chain split apart. The broken links dropped onto the gravel with a sharp clatter that echoed across the quiet valley. Rivera pulled the loose chain away and stepped back. The gate swung open slowly on its hinges. Just like that, the road was clear again. For a second, nobody spoke. Then whispers started moving through the crowd. Sheriff Blake stepped forward and looked directly at Lydia. You have 48 hours to remove these posts, he said, gesturing toward the fresh concrete bases in the ground. If they're still here after that, the county will remove them and bill the HOA for the work. Lydia opened her mouth like she was about to argue again, but nothing came out this time, because the situation had changed. The chain was gone. The road was open. and the entire neighborhood had just watched the sheriff override the HOA's decision in front of everyone. But the real shift wasn't the gate. It was the crowd. A man standing near the sidewalk shook his head as he looked at the broken chain on the ground. "I thought the board cleared this with the county," he said. Another neighbor turned toward Lydia. "You told us the road was unsafe." Someone else spoke up from the back. "How much HOA money did this cost?" The questions started coming faster. People weren't whispering anymore. They were confronting her. Several residents stepped closer, clearly frustrated. The story Lydia had been telling about safety and authority was falling apart right in front of them. Because now they could see the truth. The road had never been dangerous. The HOA never had legal authority to close it, and the board had spent community money installing a gate that the sheriff had just cut open in front of everyone. The shift in power happened almost instantly. Earlier that morning, Lydia had stood beside the gate like she controlled the entire situation. Now she looked like someone who had just made a very expensive mistake, and everyone in the neighborhood knew it. By the end of that same week, the entire neighborhood was talking about the gate. In a place like Silver Creek Estates, news travels fast. A sheriff cutting open a chain in front of half the subdivision isn't exactly the kind of thing that stays quiet. By the second evening after it happened, nearly every homeowner had heard some version of the story. The HOA board quickly announced an emergency meeting at the community clubhouse. That meeting filled up faster than anyone expected. Normally, HOA meetings in small subdivisions are quiet affairs where only a handful of residents bothered to show up. But this time, nearly every chair in the room was taken. Some people even stood along the back wall, arms folded, waiting to hear what the board had to say. Lydia Caldwell sat at the front table with the rest of the board members, but the confident posture she had carried earlier that week was gone. Her clipboard was gone too. Now she just looked tired and tense. The meeting started with a short explanation from one of the board members about recent events involving the agricultural access road. That was when the questions started. One homeowner stood up immediately. "You told us the county approved that gate," he said. Another voice spoke from the back of the room. "Did anyone actually check the records before spending HOA money?" A woman near the front held up a printed copy of the HOA budget report. "How much did the installation cost?" The room grew louder as more people joined in. Many of the residents had believed Lydia when she claimed the road closure had been legally reviewed. They assumed the HOA had consulted the county before installing a permanent structure across a road that had existed for decades. But the truth was becoming painfully clear. No county approval had ever been requested. The board had relied entirely on Lydia's claim that the HOA had authority over the road, and now the consequences were starting to pile up. The county issued a formal citation to the HOA for obstructing an agricultural emergency access route. That fine alone drained a noticeable amount from the community maintenance budget. Then there were the repair costs. The concrete posts installed for the gate had to be removed, and the ground around the easement restored to its original condition. That meant hiring a contractor to dig out the posts and repair the gravel road surface. On top of that, the HOA had to cover legal consultation fees after bringing in an attorney to review the situation once the county citation arrived. The financial impact alone was enough to anger most of the residents, but the bigger issue was trust. Several homeowners stood up and demanded to know why the board had moved forward without confirming the legal status of the road. One board member admitted quietly that the decision had been made quickly after Lydia insisted the HOA had jurisdiction. Another board member announced he was resigning effective immediately. A second followed just minutes later. The tension in the room grew heavier with every passing minute. Finally, someone proposed a vote of no confidence in Lydia Caldwell as HOA president. The motion passed easily. By the end of the meeting, Lydia was no longer in charge of the association she had tried so hard to control. Within the next week, a new HOA board was formed with a group of residents who seemed far less interested in exercising authority and far more interested in keeping the peace in the neighborhood. One of their first actions was sending a written notice to homeowners explaining the situation and promising that future decisions would require proper legal verification before HOA funds were used. After that, things changed quickly. The road returned to its normal quiet routine. Farm trucks continued rolling through the valley when deliveries arrived. Tractors moved slowly along the gravel just like they had for decades. Occasionally, an emergency vehicle would pass through during wildfire season. And interestingly enough, the residents of Silver Creek Estates seemed friendlier after everything settled down. More than once I noticed people waving when they drove past the farm entrance. A few even stopped to talk when I was working near the fence line. It turned out, most of them had never really had a problem with the road at all. They had simply trusted the HOA leadership to know what they were doing. Once that leadership changed, the tension between the farm and the neighborhood disappeared almost overnight, because in the end, the road had never been the problem. The real issue had been someone believing they had power over something they didn't actually control. These days, the gravel road looks exactly the way it always has. Quiet, dusty, running straight through the valley past my fields before curving toward the county highway. Early in the morning, the sun comes up over the ridge and lights the whole stretch of road in that soft golden color you only see out in the country. Sometimes a feed truck rolls through. Sometimes it's just my tractor heading toward the lower pasture. Most days, though, it's peaceful enough that you can hear the wind moving through the grass along the fence line. The funny thing is, the neighborhood up on the ridge turned out to be pretty friendly once everything settled down. These days, when people drive past the farm entrance, most of them wave. A few of them even stop by the little farm stand I set up near the mailbox. Fresh eggs, sweet corn in the summer, pumpkins when fall rolls around. Turns out a lot of folks who move to the country eventually realize they like having a real farm nearby. Every once in a while, someone will slow their car and point toward the spot where that yellow gate used to stand. Just an empty stretch of gravel now. But it works like a reminder, because sometimes people forget that authority has limits. HOAs can make rules about lawns, fences, and what color someone paints their mailbox, but they don't get to rewrite county law just because a board vote says so. Especially when it comes to a farm road that's been there longer than the neighborhood itself. As for Lydia Caldwell, she moved away about a year later. Last I heard, she tried joining another HOA board somewhere in a different county. Hopefully she reads the property records first this time. And my road? Still open. Still dusty. Still running right through the valley exactly the way it always has. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to Fenceline Files. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?